So I dropped a video testing the RX 7900 XTX in 10 of the most demanding games, and one of those games was CS2. And the comments section, well, let's just say a lot of you had opinions. Bro, your 9600X is bottlenecking. CPU bottleneck at 1440p. Come on, your 7900 XTX is only at 80% usage, change your CPU, bro. Look, I get it. You see the GPU not pegged at 100% and your brain immediately goes, bottleneck. CPU is holding it back, time to upgrade. But here's the thing, that's not how it works. In this video, I'll be showcasing that 9600X isn't a bad match for 7900 XTX, and is CS2 a demanding game? And today, I'm going to prove it. This isn't a defense video. This is an education video. Because what's happening under the hood is way more interesting and way more misunderstood than most people realize. As you guys can see, this is CS2 running at 1440p on max settings. You can see I am getting an FPS count of around 450. And if I go and stand in a corner, you can see my FPS actually increases to around 670. This is because the graphics card isn't actually doing much work. There was hardly anything to render. Now, when I start to move, I am getting around 500 FPS depending on scenario. But my CPU utilization is very low, while my graphics card, on the other hand, is utilizing about 95%. Now, if the 9600X was truly bottlenecking my 7900 XTX, think about what that would mean. It would mean the CPU is the limiter, the ceiling. So whether I run the game at 1080p low or 1440p ultra, the FPS should be roughly the same, right? Because the CPU can only push so many frames no matter what the GPU is doing. But that's not what we see. We see average of 500 at 1440p max and 650 at 1080p low, a massive jump. That means the GPU is clearly doing more work at higher settings and higher resolution. The FPS is scaling with GPU load. If the CPU were the wall, it wouldn't scale like this. So when I'm really playing a game, I am not playing it at 1080p low with my 7900 XTX. And in any other scenario, the graphics card is the bottleneck. Especially with the latest AAA titles, my CPU is usually chilling. While recording the video, I noticed something very interesting. What do you guys think will utilize GPU more? 1080p max setting or 1440p low setting? Pause this video and comment below. What do you think it will be? Now, if you look at the utilization at 1440p low and 1080p max, we will see that the graphics card utilization at 1080p max is more, and at 1440p low it is less. And we are getting more frames at 1440p low than 1080p max. What does this imply? Is it a graphics card bottleneck or a CPU bottleneck? Here's something else a lot of people miss. Yeah, CS2 can run on a potato. That's a fact. But that doesn't mean it's not demanding. It means it's been extremely well optimized. There's a massive difference between a game that runs well because it's simple, and a game that runs well because Valve spent years making Source 2 incredibly efficient. CS2 has complex lighting, detailed maps, physics simulation, competitive grade netcode. It's doing a lot, it just does it efficiently. When a game is this well optimized, the performance you get is a result of the engine being smart about how it uses your hardware, not because your hardware has nothing to do. Which brings me to another section of the video. This is where one of the biggest misconceptions lives. People look at GPU usage and see it sitting at 75%, 80%, and immediately scream. See, the GPU isn't fully used, CPU bottleneck. But here's what that number actually means, and more importantly, what it doesn't mean. Your GPU is not one thing. GPUs are made up of many subsystems: shader cores, rasterizers, geometry engines, ROPs, cache, memory controllers, command processors, async compute units, ray accelerators. Your GPU could be bottlenecked internally, at the geometry engine, at the rasterizer, at the memory controller, at the ROPs, and the overall GPU usage number would still show less than 100%. This is critical to understand. A GPU at 80% usage does not automatically mean the CPU is the problem. It could mean one of the GPU's own subsystems is the choke point. Seeing that 1440p low is getting more FPS than 1080p max, this could be one of the cases. But at 1080p, the GPU utilization was around 80%, while at 1440p max, the GPU utilization is around 95%. So now let's talk about the CPU side. Because a lot of people think the CPU's job in gaming is just running the game, but it's way more specific than that. In a game like CS2, the CPU is handling game simulation, player movement, game physics, networking, draw call submission, scene management. Now, here's the key insight. Most of the CPU work is tied to the number of objects, the number of players, the game complexity. It is not directly tied to resolution. So when I go from 1080p to 1440p and my FPS drops, that's the GPU doing more per pixel work. The CPU's job barely changed. We have talked about GPU and CPU. Now let's talk about the game and game engine itself. This is the part most people never learn, and it's the most important concept in this entire video. Games are pipelines. Think of it like an assembly line. The CPU and GPU are not working in parallel on the same frame. They're working in sequence, like stages in a factory. Here's what happens every single frame. The game engine running on the CPU decides what's visible. It prepares rendering commands, draw calls, shader binds, state changes. It sends those commands to the GPU. The GPU executes those commands and renders the frame. And here's the rule: if either side pauses, the other waits. This is why you can have a situation where GPU and CPU are not at 100%, and yet FPS is still capped. Neither one is fully loaded, but the FPS won't go higher. Why? Because of render pipeline stalls. The handoff between CPU and GPU isn't perfectly smooth. There are synchronization barriers, dependency chains, and timing windows. The frame rate ends up being dictated by the slowest stage in the pipeline, not the overall utilization of either chip. Let's bring this all back together. In CS2, your frame rate might become limited by any of these. Draw call submission. The CPU can only prepare so many draw calls per frame. Raster pipeline. The GPU's rasterization stage has a throughput limit. Memory latency. Waiting for texture data or buffer data. Geometry processing. Handling complex scene geometry. Synchronization barriers. CPU and GPU waiting on each other. Frame pacing. The engine timing frame delivery. This is exactly what's happening in my benchmarks. At 1440p max, the GPU is the limiter at 500 FPS. At 1080p low, the pipeline hits a different ceiling at 650 FPS. The 9600X isn't bottlenecking. It's just that the pipeline has different choke points at different workloads. Only the slowest part, whether that's a GPU subsystem or a CPU thread, controls the FPS. And in most modern games at reasonable settings and resolutions, it's not your Ryzen 5 9600X that's the slow part. So to everyone in the comments saying the 9600X is bottlenecking my 7900 XTX, I hear you. I understand why it looks that way on the surface. GPU usage not at 100% must be the CPU, right? But now you know it's not that simple. GPU's usage doesn't represent the whole GPU. Games are like pipelines with multiple choke points. CPU work doesn't scale with resolution. Lowering settings can shift the bottleneck, not remove it. And neither chip being at 100% doesn't mean there's a bottleneck. It means the pipeline is doing its job. The 9600X and 7900 XTX, they're a great pair. The numbers prove it. 500 FPS at 1440p max settings in CS2 is not a bottleneck. That's just raw performance. If you learned something from this video, smash that like button. If you disagree, drop a comment. Subscribe if you want more deep dives like this. I'll catch you in the next one.